Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Time to step back out of today's modern technological society and go back to a time when people were more in tune in the way life was and how they lived it. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 program today is our guest who's going to be joining us, author of the book One Spirit Medicine. And his journey was being trained in the Amazon by Incan shamans for more than 25 years. He also studied at San Francisco State University, where he founded the Biological Self-Regulation Laboratory to study how the mind creates psychosomatic health and disease. So as I said, we're going to step out of technology and go back to a time when knowing was the order of the day, and to discover how we can actually get back our personal power by going back to the ways of old. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Alberto Villoldo. Alberto, how are you today?
Very well, Daniel. Thank you. Very well. Good to be on your show.
You know, it's always amazing to have people like you on our program to basically bring back our ancestors and our elders who seem to have a better grasp on health, vitality, and well-being more than we seem to today with today's technological advances. How did all this start for you?
Well, I trained initially as a medical anthropologist, and we were studying at San Francisco State how we can create psychosomatic health, because we know we can create psychosomatic disease. You know, most of disease is psychosomatic. And then we had this amazing body of research on the placebo, because the placebo has been the most widely studied phenomenon in Western medicine, because every medication that we have is tested against the placebo. And you have the placebo is 89% as effective as morphine, 92% as effective as Viagra, and if you paint the placebo pill blue, it's 96% as effective. So what's happening here with the mind? How does the mind create the same effect as anesthesia? This is extraordinary, but we've never studied how we can marshal these resources to create extraordinary health that we can take with us into our later years.
You know, you're so right about that. I remember it was a couple of years back I started getting into, I guess, call it the science of the mind, but going back to the days where people were writing about the law of attraction around the turn of 1900 into the late 1800s, that sort of thing there. And there was one particular book that stood out. I think it was by an Ernest Holmes, and it was the Science of Thought or the Science of Mind. I can't remember which one it was, but this boldly stated that all disease begins and ends with thought, the power of the mind. And that seemed to be such a bold statement to be making during that time, but now here we are, this day and age, basically saying the same thing again.
Well, that's what I do in One Spirit Medicine, is to say that all disease begins and ends with thought. But healing also begins and ends with what we call spirit, which is the grander, more expansive kind of thought. But the problem is that we cannot do that. In 1900, you could do that. But today, we have been exposed to so many pollutants and antibiotics and pesticides that our brains are broken. And you can no longer really create psychosomatic health until you first upgrade your brain. And this is at the core of One Spirit Medicine. How do you repair and upgrade your brain in 6 weeks so that you can truly create extraordinary health and longevity? You know, how do you epigenetically switch on the longevity genes that are in every cell? And the moment that you do that, what happens is that disease goes away. You create the conditions for health, so disease goes away.
Now, in your book, One Spirit Medicine, you talk about resetting the death clock. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, you know, every cell has a death clock, and the timekeeper in the cell is these very little organelles that we have called mitochondria. And mitochondria are the fuel factories. They produce fuel. They combust oxygen inside the cell. And mitochondria are affected by free radicals. In fact, that's why many of us take antioxidants. And when they're compromised, damaged by free radicals, then they're the ones that mitochondria tells the cells when they need to die. And when you have cells that don't know that they need to die, that's what we call cancer. Mm-hmm. So when you're able to reset the death clock, repair your mitochondria with the superfoods and neuronutrients that I talk about in One Spirit Medicine, then you reset the death clock. Then, because Daniel, the one thing that people really sometimes forget is that there's nobody in the planet that is older than 7 years old. Because every 7 years we grow a new body. Mm-hmm. Every cell in your body is changed every 7 years. Nobody's over the age of 7. And you can either create a new body that's a little bit more wrinkled and more disease-prone than the previous one, or one that is in vibrant health and vitality. But we first have to go and do what the ancient shamans knew how to do so well, which is to repair this feminine life force inside every cell, the mitochondria, and then upgrade the quality of their brain. And then you can commune with spirit to create psychosomatic health. It's that simple.
Now, when it comes to the shamanism, we're going back here to people known as the Leica. Is that how you pronounce that?
The Leica, yeah, like the camera. Remember the old cameras, the Leicas?
Right.
Those are the ancient wisdom keepers, and that have largely disappeared. But I was privileged to study with some of these wisdom keepers in the high Andes Mountains and in the Amazon. I spent 25 years with them.
Now, the reason I wanted to bring them into the equation here, we're looking at the high Andes, things like that, and you take a look at today, and we seem to live in a time where, for instance, you brought up earlier cancer. It is an epidemic. We're spending millions of dollars, raising millions, perhaps billions, who knows, on cancer research, yet there's no cure. And it seems that now more and more people, it's becoming more prevalent. It's almost like getting the cold, in other words. It's almost as though we're expected to get it. Now, my question for this society, what I wanted to ask was, when we go back to these times, these ancient times, this wasn't something that was known, was it?
Well, let me tell you how I discovered this. When I was a young medical anthropologist, I was working in the rainforest in the Peruvian, Brazilian Amazon, and I had a research grant from a Swiss pharmaceutical giant. They wanted to discover the next great cure for cancer or heart disease or dementia or Alzheimer's. And they funded me for 3 months. And I was a young, I had a brand new PhD, and I was flat broke. And it seemed like, a good way to finance my research. And I went into villages in backwaters of the Amazon that had never seen a white man. In fact, the kids would run up to me and they would rub my hand to see if the white dirt would rub off. And what I discovered after 3 months, I met with the people from this Swiss pharmaceutical giant, and I came back empty-handed. And I said, they thought I was holding out on them, and they said, look, you could become rich, you could become famous. And I go, I'm sorry, guys, but all of the villages that I visited, they had no cancer, they had no dementia, no Alzheimer's, no heart disease. And now you say, well, these are the wild Amazon people, but if you look at the statistics, even in America in the year 1900, you had cancer, the incidence of cancer was 1 out of 10 people. Today, it's 1 out of 2, 50%. In 1900, the incidence of Alzheimer's was 1 out of 1,000. Today, if you live to be 85 years old, which all of us really want to do, your chances of having a diagnosable Alzheimer's is 50%, 50. That's terrifying. If you look at 1900, the incidence of autism was 1 child in 20,000. Today it's 1 child in 60. So we don't even have to go back 10,000 years ago, even 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so this is terrifying because, today we're dying from the diseases of civilization that were virtually unknown 100 years ago. So even more important than before, we need to learn how to marshal those resources. And first you have to detoxify the body and the brain. And then you can begin to create psychosomatic health prevention. What the shamans were really good at was prevention, and that's what we need to practice today. And before we finish our show, I want to tell you some of the recipes in One Spirit Medicine for preventing these three major dreaded curses of Western civilization.
Mm-hmm. I remember back in the early part of the 1970s as a young child when I had first heard about cancer was actually in a small abridged story in Reader's Digest. I think it was called Sunshine or something like that. I can't even remember. But I was like, what is this? And then they actually produced the movie. But as a child, I really didn't understand what it was. And then, of course, over the years, I began to get it. But then cancer seemed to become more and more prevalent, and then it was kind of one of them rare things that you heard about. But, as we said, we have all these things, and they're happening more, and it seems that our medical system, with all of these intelligent people, don't really have any answers as to why it's happening more often, or even what to do about it.
Well, I think we do have some answers today. And and we know that a lot of it is due to our diet. That our diet is killing us, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But you're right. There was hardly any incidence of any of these terrible illnesses. And and I think that as far as Western medicine, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease care system. And today we have to practice prevention, and the time to do it is now. And we have to really begin to, because we're from a generation that used to play with mercury. Remember when the thermometer broke and you had mercury in your hand and how it wiggled?
Well, I don't know that I ever got to do that, but sure.
and also, we had many of us did, many of our listeners I'm sure did, and we came from a generation whose parents had lead plumbing, lead pipes. We know how toxic that is. And all of these toxins go through the placental barrier. And they're beginning to inform us. Even before we were born, we were born into a toxic world with toxic beliefs and a disconnection from nature. And this is what One Spirit Medicine is about, is how do we repair that connection to nature and to the great matrix of consciousness in the universe that's continually upgrading the codes for evolutionarily growing a new human, a new body, and that we can do in our lifetimes.
Now, I know because we are approaching the ancients in your book, One Spirit Medicine, one of the things you talk about is a vision quest. Now, we seem to live in a day and an age where we're constantly starving for meaning in our lives, and probably at times finding others telling us what we think that meaning is. For instance, maybe you want to be someone who's world-traveled and wealthy, for instance. That's what you really want. That's the ideal lifestyle. You may pursue that, do everything you were supposed to do, but once you seem to arrive and reap, let's say, the spoils of it all, you say, is this it? And it seems that we just don't have any real ritual or anything that moves us from a meaningful place inside of us. And I know this is something that in One Spirit Medicine and that you address is that very thing.
Yep. Yeah, the search for meaning and living in a world of total meaninglessness. I mean, it's amazing. I was surprised one time when I was in the Amazon, and at a certain point I started studying with the shamans and becoming a shaman. And it was like the same comparison as if you want to go study the astronauts. You can study the astronauts, or you can become an astronaut. And so I did, and I went through this rigorous training process. And one of the old medicine men said to me one time, I had a PhD by then, and they said, you have a lot of information, but very little knowledge, very little wisdom. And I go, what do you mean? He said, yeah, you're pretty stupid for a guy that has a PhD. And
oh boy!
And I said to the shaman, it's Dr. Alberto to you, idiot. So the difference between information and knowledge is information is knowing that water is H2O. Knowledge is being able to make it rain. And that really struck me. You know, information is having a diagnosis, knowledge is being able to heal. And so what One Spirit Medicine says is that you got to go on a personal vision quest to find that guiding vision in your life, not the better car, the better looking spouse that you think you deserve, or the better house, but why were you born in this planet? What is it that you came here to do? And what we came here to do was to dream the world into being. And this is the practice of the vision quest. You don't have to go into the Australian outback for a month. You can do this in your own house. But set aside a block of time where you can dedicate yourself to entertaining the big questions in life. Mm-hmm. And not from a place of fear, but from a place of beauty and joy. And then everything in your life begins to line up to take you to that place of meaning and purpose. Mm-hmm. And then all the abundance comes along with it. But if you focus only on having the better car and the better job and then you're not going to get it. You gotta hold the big picture, which is what your destiny is about here. And that's what the vision quest is. But you also accompany it with certain diet, which is the old Paleolithic diet of the shamans, which are proteins and fats, no carbs. Because the carbs, the grains particularly, have been breaking our brains. Our brains have been broken because of the agricultural revolution that introduced grains into our diet that the body doesn't recognize. Our DNA does not recognize and is not able to effectively metabolize grains, and it turns them into carbohydrates, which are sugars. And the sugars, we know from the laboratory, from the science, that the sugars feed a very primitive Neanderthal brain, a predatory brain that lives in fear and scarcity.
Now, as you have worked with people through this, what kind of transformations have you seen in people? And from the perspective, though, of someone who might have looked at this and said, oh, come on, not this again. Don't you know that, with our technology that there's a better way to go here, but they found transformed by the experience itself?
Well, absolutely. If you follow the dietary recommendations in One Spirit Medicine for 1 month, you find that your brain fog begins to clear, that many of your symptoms disappear. See, we think that symptoms that we're getting, the forgetfulness, where did I leave my car keys, a little ache here or there, that's part of getting old. It's not. It's not. You can live symptom-free and pain-free, but we have to revert back to a dietary practice that was before the arrival of agriculture, before we started feeding ourselves on sugar and grain. And all it takes is 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And in 6 weeks, you have a degree of clarity. I put my 93-year-old mother through it, and who'd been living in pain for 30 years. And the minute she went 4 weeks into the diet, she was completely pain-free. And she started doing yoga at 92.
You got to love being able to do yoga at 92. I know that I have an experience. Some years back, my wife's parents were in town, and we decided to take a trip up to Mount St. Helens in the Great Northwest. And when you're there at the mountain, there is a part when you're up at the top area there where there's a steep, long stairway that you can take all the way up so you can really get a nice bird's eye view of the crater and everything else. So, the stairway probably seemingly goes for about 1/8 of a mile. It's pretty long and it's steep. And I watched my wife's father at the age of 74 literally start running up this thing. I was out of breath just walking up a quarter of the way, and here he was running up, almost halfway to the top. Come on, let's get moving, and I'm thinking, My goodness, this guy's got a lot of energy. So when you say that, the symptoms such as aches and pains and brain fog and forgetfulness are just symptoms of aging, and that we see that message pumped to us, we begin to expect that it's true. Sort of like our political campaigns, if we say a lie several times, then it becomes the truth, so it's no longer a lie. It gets kind of crazy what you listen to after a while.
The problem is that these things become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Right.
So and if you expect that as you get older, you get weaker, you get debilitated, you get cranky, now this is the result of the damage that our environmental toxins and the poisons in our food have done to our brain. And the minute and you can reverse that. See, I remember when we were in college, I learned that brain cells did not regenerate. So I remember every shot of tequila that I had, I thought, well, that's 20,000 brain cells. But today, in 1998, we discovered neurogenesis. Neurogenesis means that the brain actually can produce new brain cells. So you can trigger the production of stem cells in the brain to repair and upgrade the quality of your brain. And this is at the core of one spirit medicine. This is the very first thing that the Native American shamans did. They fasted and they ate certain plants. And I remember being in the Amazon and going through my training, and this old medicine man saying, you got to eat these roots and these barks, and they taste like crap. And I said, well, why? And I wanted a scientific explanation, right? And they said to me, well, because it's always been done this way. Then I ate them, and then 30 years later, we took them to the laboratory. And in the laboratory, we found that what they did was to repair the brain and upgrade the quality of the brain. And one of these that we can all get at a health food store is the omega-3 fatty acids that the body does not produce, but the brain needs it in order to repair it, to upgrade. And in fact, breast milk is 40% DHA. That's one of the omega-3s. And we used to get our DHA from fish. But today, all of our fish is farm-raised, and they're fed corn, so they have no DHA. So the moral of the story is that unless you have a friend who's lactating, you need to supplement. You need to, and if you do 3 to 5 grams of the omega-3 fatty acids, you can buy them in any health food store, but get a good brand. Within 6 weeks, you will repair the regions in the brain that allow for learning to happen, for new learning, for discovery, so you don't become a grouchy old person. So you're still in awe of the world, you're still enchanted by it, you're still learning, you're growing, and then you lose that attitude, that been there, done that attitude, and that becomes, oh, never been there, never done that, today is a new day. Mm-hmm. But we got to start with these ancient strategies that were discovered by the shamans thousands of years ago, but that we're just now rediscovering in science.
Now, on the omega-3 fatty acids, is that a powder form, a pill form, or is there a more natural way to get these? Because you said fish is pretty much out of the question. But is there another way that you can get these?
Well, these were the fish oils. Years ago, your parents and my parents were given a spoonful of fish oil every day.
Cod liver oil, I remember that in the Little Rascals.
It's horrible stuff. But if you take it in a capsule, it's exquisite, it's extraordinary. And you need it, the brain needs it. And that's just one of 10 different things that I recommend in One Spirit Medicine that will make a huge difference within 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, you'll shed the pain, you'll shed the griping. There's nothing worse than a grouchy old person,
No kidding.
I remember a few nights ago, my wife and I were eating at a restaurant. I'm calling from New York now because I'm on book tour for this new book for One Spirit. And there's this old couple, probably in their 80s, and they're sitting on another table. We're looking at them, and they're not talking to each other. And the first thing he says after about 15 minutes, he says, "Cut the salt." And I go, wow. And I could read between the lines. He'd say, pass the salt, you wench, you ruined my life. And this is what happens when the brain begins to break down. And when you today, we know that 1 out of 2 people alive today will have diagnosable Alzheimer's. But research also shows that if you take your DHA, your omega-3s, that your risk for Alzheimer's is reduced by 90%. Wow! This is incredible, and this is something all of us can do. But again, the key here is prevention. Because if you don't do the repair now, then it's too late. Because there's no way that once the brain gets clogged up with all of the conditions that cause Alzheimer's, it's impossible to reverse.
Mm-hmm. Now, because we're just about out of time, I was wondering, is there a main takeaway that our listeners can get from you? What would that be?
Well, the very first thing is that you've got to detox the body from all of the chemicals we've been exposed to, the pesticides, the mercury, the lead. The second thing is to upgrade the brain with the neuronutrients in One Spirit Medicine. And you don't have to go to the Amazon like I did. You can go to Whole Foods. And the third is the practice of infinity. Once you repair the brain, you're able to do the One Spirit practices. And these are eminently practical. You can reselect your genetic destiny so you don't have to live out the ailments and the life stories of our parents and our grandparents. And then you can truly begin to dream your world into being the kind of life you really want to have. But you detox the body, upgrade the brain, and then you can truly practice the stuff that all of these books say we can all do, which is to create your own reality. But you cannot do that with a broken brain.
I couldn't agree with you more. Now that we got the brain fixed for our listeners, where's a website people can find out about the book and your work?
Well, 2 websites. The first one is, what I do today is to train modern shamans. I train men and women in the practice of energy medicine. And the website is the4winds.com. The for F-O-U-R, winds, W-I-N-D-S.com. Or you can go to onespiritmedicine.com and see some of the science behind it as well.
Dr. Alberto Villoldo, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It's always enlightening when we get to talk about these things that have worked and been tried and true and proven for centuries, and now for some reason we need to have science to prove they were right even though they were effective.
Thank you, Daniel. Good to be with you.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Again, you can find out more by going to the4winds.com to find out more about this wonderful book and this way of being. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.